All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another great discussion lined up for you tonight with a new guest. He is the developer from Sinister Design and is currently working on the tactical RPG Together in Battle, and we're going to be discussing that as well as just some general tactical RPG design tonight. So please welcome Craig Stern. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I am trapped inside. I'm sure you are as well right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a bit of a cold last week, which has pushed everything back. So now everything that I had planned for last week is now happening all at the same time this week, which is always fun. It's good to be busy, right?
I don't know about you. I love it when my schedule turns into a literal like train wreck, just things colliding. Best.
Well, my fans say that I'm a masochist for playing all like the difficult games, so maybe that is true. We gotta love the challenge, right?
I sent an alpha build together in battle to a YouTuber some weeks ago, and he just immediately went brutal difficulty. I was like, whoa, that takes some guts. I'm impressed. He did pretty well too. Like he clearly played a lot of tactics games.
All right, but it is great to at least get everything set up for our talk tonight. So while I'm hoping we get some people joining, I know YouTube's always weird in terms of sending out alerts and whatnot for these kinds of talks, but if they miss it, of course, it will be available in recorded form. So, to get the ball rolling with Craig, since this is your first time on, could you talk a little bit about your background as well as what is Together in Battle?
Sure, yeah. Gosh, where do I even start? I've been making games since I was a kid. Largely because, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in the days before everyone had a good internet connection, and I was real bored. So I would just get like playing cards and checkers sets and whatever was lying around and just make weird little games out of them just to amuse myself. And growing up, I'd say like, probably Shining Force was like my favorite game. Loved the hell out of that game. Um, and yeah, it was just an abiding interest of mine making games for many years. In college, back before there was such a thing as game design majors, just to date myself here,
Oh,
I
yes.
took like a course or two in game design and like 3D modeling and animation, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. I like this, but it was never like foremost in my mind. And then there was this one summer. It was the summer before I started law school. I had a few months free, and I said to myself, I want to undertake a creative project because this is a thing I have done my whole life. I like made albums, or I wrote a musical once, and this particular summer I was like, I want to make a game. So I got a copy of Flash from my stepdad, and I found a bunch of free online tutorials, and I made this little Flash JRPG called Telepath RPG Chapter 1. I sent it in to this contest that Armor Games was running over on newgrounds.com. It got this like $250 prize. I was like, yeah, awesome. And then, and then law school started. And I was like, all right, that's it. Fun times, but now it's time to buckle down and get those good grades. And I did, but then the end of the first semester came around and I was like, I kind of want to make another game. So I started working on Telepath RPG Chapter 2. And this time I was determined to like really make something in the Shining Force mold. So that came out. That ended up, I think I got like a $2,000 sponsorship from Armor Games for that one. Which, I mean, it's like nothing, right? But in those days, it was very exciting. Um, and I think it got like maybe 2.3 million plays on Addicting Games, and like a few people around the internet would randomly know me as the guy who did that, and I was like, this is cool. Um, but now, I really got to buckle down and just get through the rest of law school. But it just that itch just continued, and then I found myself just like writing, plans for like, okay, what am I going to do with the third chapter? That ended up becoming Telepath RPG Servants of God, which I released in 2012. And I'm a licensed attorney. That's my day job, but I still make games because I love it.
Nice. And so many things like dating you with talking about Flash and all that. Unfortunately, especially with Flash, I think they went. It was pulled what, like late 2020. They finally discontinued support.
Yeah, they finally pulled the plug. It was on life support for a while.
Yeah.
Most of us saw writing on the wall, and we were like, okay, we need to jump ship. There was like one small core of people who were like, no, we're gonna survive. We're gonna make this thing live. We're going to we're gonna do like they do with the Mountain in Game of Thrones. We're gonna continue on with Zombie Flash. Lars Doucet or Doucet, forget how he pronounces his last name. The guy that did Defender's Quest.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He and a bunch of people were trying for a long time to spin off this like freeware game engine out of Flash.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that project is still alive. I was sort of hesitant to get involved because while I do a lot of programming, it isn't like my passion. I prefer to work in an environment where there's like good documentation of how to do stuff. So I ended up just sort of jumping ship for Unity, which is what I've been using for the past 5 years or so. And I won't say no complaints, but it's a pretty capable development environment, and so far it's working out well.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what attracted you to tactical RPGs like in the beginning? Like what part of the design really like stood out to you?
That's a great question. I think there's like two things that really at the beginning sort of gripped me about tactical RPGs. One is the fact that they're turn-based. I can't tell you how much I love being able to just sit and think through a problem and come up with a creative solution. Like there's lots of turn-based RPGs. I think what makes turn-based tactical RPGs so special is that they have such a significant possibility space for you to play around in, right? That time you're sitting and thinking, you're not just like, okay, am I going to attack or defend? Am I going to, use cure? Bless you. Am I going to use Fraga? Like you're not just selecting things from a list, right? You have to think spatially. You have to think about, okay, if I move here, though, am I blocking other better moves that other characters could make?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole other dimension to it, literally, because it's taking place on a grid. And that's something I've always really appreciated about tactical RPGs specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I remember playing Ogre Battle back in the day, Fire Emblem, and I like what you said about having to think through a problem, because it reminds you a lot of what I love about kind of like optimization games. Stuff like Factorio, Dyson Sphere, even like the simple idle games out there. It's that idea of being able to sit down and say, okay, I need to get X to work. What are my options to do that in?
Yep, I agree.
So, I gotta ask you, with the love of tactical RPGs, have you played any of like the Disgaea or the Nipponichi? Like the super. These are like several thousand-hour games for you to play.
I haven't sunk several thousand hours into them, but yeah, I've played the Disgaea series. I love them. Like I would say while Shining Force was my oldest love in the SRPG universe, I had certainly played a lot more games before I reached Telepath Tactics, which was my last released video game back in 2015. And that one, I really went all in, trying to create as deep and varied a sandbox of different mechanics as possible in order to create just this really deep and engaging play space in the battles that players can express their tactical creativity in. So I definitely drew quite deliberately from Disgaea. I drew from Final Fantasy Tactics. I drew from Fire Emblem. If you look at like all of the different systems in the game, there's like little bits of all of them present, plus some extra things that I just thought would be cool, like being able to build bridges and barricades.
And I guess here's a question. I'm sure something that you've thought, I'm sure people have asked you as well. Because there's always, whenever we talk about like genre definitions, there are so many arguments. What is a roguelike? What is a roguelite? And are like tactical RPG and tactical strategy RPG, or just tactical strategy and tactical RPG strategy, or TSRPG, however we want to probably define it. So I guess like what are your like what's your opinion in terms of like what separates a tactical RPG from something just like a strategy game or a turn-based strategy game?
So, interesting fact, tactical RPG is the most precise, in my opinion, way to sum up the subgenre, right? Because it's a tactics game. It's very much tactical in focus. Traditionally, they're called SRPGs, and you would think that stands for strategy RPGs. That's what most people use it to refer to. But originally, the term was simulation RPG because they were meant to be like war game simulations, which I think is pretty interesting. But that's a digression. That's not really what you're asking. You're asking what's the difference between a strategy game and a tactics game, if I understand you. And to my mind, it's about scope and it's about where the design focus is. When you're dealing with strategy, you're dealing with high level stuff. You're dealing with unit production, research, building creation. You're dealing with how to manage resources on a sort of grand scale, right? You're dealing with war simulation that's a bit more like, you know, how Ulysses S. Grant viewed the U.S. Civil War, right? If you can outproduce the enemy and just overwhelm them, the small scale stuff doesn't matter as much. Tactics is all about that small scale stuff. It's about having a set amount of resources and choosing how to deploy it in such a way as to produce the outcome you want. It's about positioning. It's about keeping individual units alive. What strategy gamers call micromanaging, right? It's the micro. That's what tactics is about.
Yeah. And like probably like as you said, like the macro versus the micro is a really good point because we've seen developers, I think, really embrace both sides of that. Like again, with games like Together in Battle and Telepath Tactics focusing on the small scale, and now you think of stuff like Supreme Commander, Planetary Annihilation, and even again like the slew of war game and 4X games out there that are just about here's an entire universe. Try manage, 47 different planets in their production chains at once.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I find games like that really interesting, but I also find them sort of overwhelming and very impersonal, which definitely appeals to a certain type of gamer, I think.
Yeah, like a friend was trying to get me into playing a Total War 3 Kingdoms, and he may be watching this, either live or recorded right now, I don't know. And I had that same problem where I have no background in the Total War games. I played like maybe like 20 minutes of like a few of them back in the day, and it's just like I sit down, I hit start, like, okay, here's the entire scope of China. Here's every province. Start conquering. I'm like, okay, like I don't even know what any of these buttons mean. Like, what am I supposed to be doing here?
That reminds me of when I first tried playing Crusader Kings 2.
Yes.
I got a full half hour into the tutorial and it like wasn't even close to done. And I was like, I feel like I'm like trying to file my taxes right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is way too much.
Yeah.
Like just give me like a scenario to start with and then teach me gradually, please. This is just the biggest info dump I've ever been subjected to.
Mm-hmm. And yet, with that said, I'm the guy who will still spend like hundreds of hours playing like Dyson Sphere and Factorio, and of course, like with our top for tonight, I've spent a whole lot of time with the Gaia games where I will do the item world like 30 times, over the length of 10 hours just to power level my character up so I can get him to ascend and then reset his level.
And the item world is so brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And I guess like continue with this like about kind of like macro versus micro. What are like your thoughts on like I guess how I'm not sure how I want to say it. It's like how deep or how like chunky like a Disgaea game is in terms of mechanics because like the actual tactical layer of those games is very light or it's very light compared to like what we consider to be like more famous examples like Fire Emblem, Advance Wars, etc. But they put so much of a focus on those subsystems and those secondary mechanics that in a way it becomes I always say like it's almost like a game where the main game isn't to play that. You're just here for the optimization and just how can I get my character to do 10 million points of damage as soon as possible.
That's fun. That's a fun thought. Yeah. I guess that's true. I'm not a huge fan of how the Disgaea games are structured
Mm-hmm.
in that regard. Like, when I was young, I was all about grinding.
Oh
Sure, yeah,
yes.
let's get to level a zillion. Let's just see if we can one shot the final boss. But these days, I don't know. These days, I like something a little more focused and a little more balanced. Something that is less about giving me hours of play and more about giving me high quality play with the hours I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I am definitely the same way. I have bought every one of the games in Bunny Chest put on the PC. I have rebought them from my Steam, and that's like I don't know how many hours of game that I will probably never have the time to get to. On top of all the other work I have to do, on top of all the other games out there, like I spent the last 3 nights playing Dyson Sphere, and I feel guilty now because I have all this other games in progress to get done. I can't just sit and play that game.
I hear you. Yeah, I've had to honestly force myself to cut back on
Mm-hmm.
playing games in order to get enough work done on together in battle. There's only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah,
Um,
until we can have a new game plus mode, I suppose, and we can have like double production in real life. I guess.
that would be cool.
Yeah. No, I think that would be amazing. Somebody implement that here. So, I guess with the depth at the tactical layer, I think this is another interesting point. We've seen games kind of approach this from different viewpoints. There's stuff like XCOM that, with Rax's take, they've kind of moved more and more towards making that tactical layer very, I guess, zippy. You just can hit the button, they immediately run over, you have 2 actions, bing, bang, boom, you're done. Then there are some that go for a lot more. I can move, I can attack, I can, set myself down and defend. I can, queue up a skill in the next turn. I don't know if you saw the game, what was it? Other Side that came out last year. It was kind of like a tactical. It was another like tactical RPG, very challenging game that you could set up different moves. It had an entire timeline you can manipulate in terms of who goes what and where. Can I push their turn back? And I just want to get your thoughts. Like, how granular do you think the tactical layer should be or needs to be?
I think that just depends on your audience. I sadly I have not had a chance to check out Other Side. I did hear about it, but I haven't had a chance to really look at it. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a whole universe of different approaches to the tactical RPG. You have games like Wintermore Tactics Club that are very like
Hmm.
explicitly geared towards new gamers, people who don't need a ton of depth, who will be challenged by just a very bare bones system because they're not used to it. And it's good to have games like that because they're very approachable for new players and they can welcome new people into the genre. Um, Personally, as someone who's been playing tactical RPGs for decades, that doesn't really do it for me.
Hmm.
I like the crunchy, granular stuff, but I don't judge people if they aren't quite that into the most mind melting tactical games out there.
Yeah, and I did play Wintermore last year. I thought it was okay. And again, like I ran to that same point where it's a cute game, but it just wasn't really holding my attention. And I think there has to be, or there should be, that middle ground between here's something very light and breezy, and here's something that's going to take the next 3,000 hours of your life to try and get like 20% done it.
That's a really hard balance to
Yeah,
strike, and I'm not sure it's worth it for a game to try. That to me feels too much like trying to please everyone,
yeah.
and you risk ending up watering down your vision and not pleasing anyone when
Hmm.
you go for that sort of thing.
Yeah. I know, like Nipponichi with like some of the later Disgaea games have been trying to have it both ways. They've been making their like the onboarding a lot more structured, and actually like you can't do the item world until like you're at like chapter 3, where in the first game just here's everything, figure it out as you go along, and it is tough, I think, to try and like strike that balance.
Yeah, I definitely think it's smart to try to onboard players. That is one of the challenges I've been dealing with in Together in Battle is there's so much that about the game that's procedurally generated
Mm-hmm.
that it's difficult to have a structured, gradual like introduction to all of the mechanics. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when you don't when you don't know which characters or even which classes a
Mm-hmm.
player will have in any given battle, how do you say like, cool, here's how you do this, here's how you do that?
Yeah.
um, it's a that's the sort of thing where I think you just have to play test a lot and you have to just watch your play testers and you have to make a note every time they screw something up and be like, okay, I need to have some way to signpost that they can get backstabbed. I need to have some way to
Mm-hmm.
let them know you can right click characters to access their inventory and use bandages. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's so many, especially in Together in Battle, there's so many mechanics. Um, and inevitably one of the pieces of feedback I get when people play it is, oh, I wish I had known this, I wish I had known that. And
Yep.
um, I'm just like, look, I agree with you, but I can't go Crusader Kings 2 on you. Like, you're just gonna have to learn as you go.
Yeah, and like that's I think like one of the hardest challenges when you're trying to teach someone these games, that so many systems are on the back end that if you're not already familiar with the genre, you'll never know they existed. Like imagine like somebody brand new playing the Disgaea game, never hearing about what an item world is, and then just completely ignoring that entire system until you tell them, yeah, you're supposed to use that and supercharge your weapons.
That's interesting. I feel like the game tells you about it explicitly at some point, right?
Yeah, I think
At least the first one I seem to remember.
they'll usually
But
do
yeah, I
like
mean that would be
a
disastrous if they could go without it.
yeah, they do. I think stop you like at least like a few hours and say, "Hey, you need to level up an item." But it is always tricky to know just how much to expect out of someone when they're playing these games. And again, I think that's why grand strategy games have always been so troublesome for me. Is that I go into them with zero. Like I don't know what any of this is, and they're already assuming, yeah, you've played these before. No, no, I haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, I had a an experience rather like that with Age of Wonders 3. I I started playing it. I actually really enjoyed that game for as long as it took me to suddenly get stomped by the AI out of nowhere. Um, yeah, like great mechanics, a really interesting game, but the game gives you absolutely no indication of its pacing. Like, when is the AI going to come after you? What
Mm-hmm.
can you expect the enemy's armies to have by that point? What do you need to do to prepare? I feel like if I were going to return to that game, I would need to go to YouTube, watch some videos from people who already know how to play it, and then be like, okay, I need to go for this kind of building so I can produce tier 3 units by this turn so I can be ready for the enemy attack. Like, there's a lot of, I think, trial and error that those games expect you to just do if you're a new player. And it takes so long. And it's so unforgiving if
Mm-hmm.
you don't already know, is the problem. Like in a game like Together in Battle, I deliberately go out of my way to ensure that you can bounce back if you make a few mistakes. As long as you're, not playing on brutal difficulty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like with grand strategy games, everything is so intertwined
Mm-hmm.
that it's very difficult to do that unless you've deliberately set up a series of escalating scenarios where you just gradually introduce more systems to the player.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen, I think, a grand strategy game really go for that level of onboarding, and it is a shame. And as you said a few minutes ago, with any game that has like procedural generation in mind, where you're letting the AI kind of do its own thing, you can't really do a 100% structured tutorial because you don't know what's going to happen. You can tell the player, "Oh, now's the time to check your economy." But let's say this game they don't have an economy yet. You say, "What do I do?" It's like I just click a button and what just happened? I don't know.
Yeah, at some point, I really want to try my hand at making a 4X because I think most 4Xs are really way more inaccessible than they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I recently got into playing the Battle of Polytopia, and I was like, oh, this is what a 4X should be like. It's it's not that deep, but everything in there interacts with everything else, and it's relatively simple to learn all the systems, and it just flows quickly. Like each match takes less than an hour. It's beautiful. Like, that is the sort of, I think, strategy layer that of modern 4X should be aspiring to, unless they're specifically going after established veterans of the genre. Either that, or they should have a sort of story driven campaign that goes StarCraft 2 level granularity in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, like, this is this unit, this is how you do this thing, here's a scenario built specifically around that to teach you, one after the other until finally you have all of the mechanics in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of the challenge with that is that usually these single player campaigns, like, they do absolutely nothing to prepare you for multiplayer. Like, I beat StarCraft 2's campaign, then I got stomped into the ground like the second I went multiplayer. But if we're talking about like a tactical strategy or a game that is just player versus the I think that's fine in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good point. If I were making an RTS, that would be something I'd be very worried about.
Mm-hmm.
As it is, my game doesn't have multiplayer, so I'm good.
There you go. um, guess getting back to more like general tactical RPG questions. I was just reading a Sir Seed's comment here. Yeah, long gone are the days where games came with instruction manuals. Yeah, imagine just somebody writing an entire manual guide for Crusader Kings right now. That could be like a small
God,
novel right there. um,
that's some Tolstoy level shit.
yeah. But one thing I wanted to ask you about are your thoughts on kind of like Fire Emblem's approach? Because Fire Emblem as a franchise has certainly come a very long way from its original games. I played the GBA ports. I think I played them right up until they switched to the DS, and that was kind of like when they had like their huge breakout one. And I forget which one was it. It was I remember looking it up. It was the one that was supposedly going to be the final Fire Emblem, but it didn't sell well, so they just put everything they wanted into it. And
Oh, Awakening.
yeah, that one. And since then, they have really bounced back with it. And one of the ways they've done it has been, I think, really like they're trying to, I think, do everything. Like they have now multiple modes for difficulty. You can have permadeath on, you can have it off, and now it's just a very elaborate, relationship system. Which I know that is a feature, of course, that's in Together in Battle as well. So, like, what are your thoughts on kind of like fire, like that level of tactical RPG, and kind of like where it has come or where it's going now?
Oh gosh. Yeah, Fire Emblem's evolved a lot. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you consider, the original Fire Emblem effectively invented the genre, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
of course it's come a long way because the genre has come a long way. It would be very sad if, Three Houses came out and it was still like Shadow Dragon. Um, yeah, Fire Emblem is such an interesting case because they've been experimenting a lot with different mechanical approaches in recent games. Um, Honestly, in some ways, I think their mobile game, Fire Emblem Heroes, is the most interesting from a mechanics standpoint, just in terms of how much it departs from the main series. Like I don't know if you've played it, but it's deterministic. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are no dice rolls going on under the hood at all
Mm-hmm.
in that game, which, when you consider what most Fire Emblem games are like, that's a radical departure, but it
Mm-hmm.
works. It works well. I wouldn't say that that game's relationship systems are great, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as combat mechanics, it's interesting, and they've shown a lot of willingness to experiment. In Fates, they started introducing abilities that affect people. They actually have started in Awakening, but they really went all in on it in Fates. They introduced abilities that could do area of effect, which if you've played Fire Emblem, you know that there's almost never anything like that. Um, things like Savage Blow, right? In Fates, they didn't incorporate it into the little combat cutscenes, but it was like afterwards, right? Suddenly, everyone within I think 1 to 2 spaces would take 10% of their health worth of damage. It added this new dimension, and they've taken that a little bit further with Fire Emblem Three Houses. They've gone, they took some lessons from Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. They said, all right, we're going to introduce individual named skills that characters can learn, and we are going to introduce gambits that can do area of effect. And it's a little weird in that they're kind of bolting these things on to their existing systems rather than just rethinking the systems.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't argue with the results. It's fun. It works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like that's always that interesting point. I want to get back to talking about RNG in a minute, but regarding like skills and abilities, because I think this is where you get very like nitty gritty. Like we wanted to tonight on this one point, but like the skill layer when it comes to these games can be either like ridiculously like overpowered. Like you can play games like the Scare where the right skill combos, nothing's going to do anything for you. And then there are games that go for okay, this does point two 0.075% more damage on your character, or this gives you an additional 0.175% chance at dodging. And there's gotta be, or there must be like a way to like approach this that makes things at least interesting without just outright destroying your system. Because I've seen so many, not just in the strategy RPG market, but just like RPGs in general, that there will always be that one busted skill that just completely wrecks a game, and like 5 to 10 skills that are just worthless. Like they who grew up playing the original Final Fantasy can attest to.
Yeah. I think, at least personally, the way I approach that issue is when I'm creating a skill, I try to think what will introduce interesting options for the player? What will
Mm-hmm.
open up interesting decisions that the player has to make? Um, right, right. Like with Disgaea, as you say, the skills get to a point where either you're using like the super duper high level skills or you're getting stomped by enemies that are. Um, and you also mentioned games where like special abilities are basically worthless,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I'm also not a big fan of. I like that whole like, oh yes, I will socket this gem into my weapon, and now I have a 1% extra chance of doing a crit.
Mm-hmm.
Great, I guess. Just change how I play. Does that actually affect the experience for me? No, it doesn't. It means that I have like a marginally higher chance of something happening, but it's going to be imperceptible to me as a player.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I don't think that's a good use of developer time or resource. I think if you're going to put something into the game, it needs to be something that the player will notice and that they will think about while they're playing, that they will actually factor into their overall approach to the game. So, one particular class of skills that I have gone out of my way to give to as many different classes as possible are skills that affect unit positioning.
Mm-hmm.
Things like shove and pull and throw and kinetic gust. There are a lot of different ways that these can interact with characters and with the battlefield, and they open up a lot of tactical options. That's the kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing that I want to have in abundance in the game. I want to have that open up different tactical possibilities and that the player can sit and think, okay, if I move this character onto this square, then suddenly that opens up a new thing I can do with this other character.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you get a lot of games these days where characters are built to synergize with each other in very specific, predictable ways. Right? This
Mm-hmm.
character does a thing, and this character can follow up with this other thing. 1, 2, and that's cool and all, but it's not very creative. I want to have an experience that's more like a tactical toy box. I want the player to sit and think about what can I do to string together all these abilities in creative ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is a really good way to approach these kinds of games where, like you said, it's about figuring out, okay, if the field is like this and I have these skills, how can I use this to my advantage? As opposed to just giving a character, 3 different kinds of attack skills. This one attacks at 1 square. This one attacks at 2 squares. This one does, the T or the X shape pattern, and that's the only real choice. And I think that's one of the things I like to Skea kind of like fails a little bit at is that all the skills and all the choices at the end of the day they don't really matter. It's all about numbers. If I have my mage with was like Omega Star or Giga Star, like and it's higher level, nothing else really matters. He's just going to nuke everything on the field on his first turn.
Yeah, I mean there are things I really like about the way this guy approaches things. I like the way I honestly really like the way it experiments with different AoE patterns. I
Mm-hmm.
think it maybe gives the player a little bit too much
Mm-hmm.
flexibility in terms of where attacks can hit and in what patterns they can hit, particularly with spells.
Oh yes.
Because, as you say, it gets to the point where it almost doesn't matter, right? You have so many options that really it just comes down to, okay, who can dish out the most damage quickly and at range. Um, there's a line to draw there, right? You can't give a player interesting choices if the choices don't really matter,
Yeah.
right? There have to be restrictions to force those choices to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and trying to make those skills meaningful is very tough. Like you said, with the follow up or having these synergies, that usually what ends up happening in these games is that if you have a synergy, it's usually so good that becomes your de facto tactic. If character A shoots a fireball and character B does more damage to enemies on fire, well, your whole strategy from that point is going to be A then B, and it will never change.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't disagree. There are ways around that. Like, you know, not all characters can, maybe you'll have some characters that are resistant to fire, right? Like, I mean, you can see examples of that in, like, say, Persona 5, right? Persona
Mm-hmm.
5 has a few synergies like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't always work because different enemies are vulnerable to different types of attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that, you have limited resources to work with, right? You're not given, you know, like in Disgaea, right? You do have limited amounts of magic points, but there's nothing stopping you from just stockpiling candies and chocolates and just, you
Yeah.
know, re-upping whenever you need to,
Yeah.
right? It's those limitations that force you to really think, okay, yes, this is the optimal move this turn, but how many more times can I do this move? And is now the time when I need it the most?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was something I took away from Shining Force back in the day, right? You have a limited amount of magic points, and once it's out for the battle, that's it. You're done. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was maybe a little too restrictive, though. The approach I generally take in my games is you have a limited amount of what I call energy, because there's no magic in this universe,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you can you this just becomes fodder for another player decision. If you're running out of energy, you can say, okay, I'm going to forego a turn with this character so they can rest and regain some energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you'll have a turn where the best move you can make with the character is to just not touch them so that they
Mm-hmm.
can do something more effective on a subsequent turn.
Yeah. And one thing, like as you're saying about having these different skills and making them more interesting to use, I think that's one of the reasons why I've been really drawn to a lot of the like deck building roguelikes that have come out in, like the last 4 or 5 years. Because I think there's very similar, I think, analogs to that kind of design and kind of this setup for a lot of these tactical RPGs. Because each card is a unique skill unto itself. So it kind of affords the developer, like, if I want this card to, reverse all magic damage, well, that's what this card's role is. Like, there's no worry about having it, you know, be, like, copied on 17 other cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Deck building roguelikes are an interesting case, right? They're so appealing as a developer in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, for one thing, it's a deck of cards. You've got a system for randomizing and producing emergent states right
Oh,
there.
yes.
That's intuitive to every player. And they can directly affect the options available to them. What a great thing to take advantage of. Why wouldn't you want to make a game like that? Uh, and just from a cost standpoint, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when using an ability is you animate the card going womp, and then maybe a little screen shake and some numbers pop up. Oh my god, you've just saved so much money on animations. Great.
Mm-hmm.
um, so there's a ton of appeal there. I feel like there is one big weakness in games like that, though, and it is that the player's options are not consistent from turn to turn,
Mm.
and not because the state of the field has changed, but because the game is just giving them different possibilities to pick from in an inconsistent fashion.
Mm-hmm.
That part of it doesn't appeal to me as
Yeah.
much.
Mm-hmm. Now, one other point I wanted to ask about regarding like RNG, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what Together in Battle is, like kind of more in depth. Going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about having probability versus not. This is another, I think, very big point for a lot of not just tactical RPGs, but strategy games in general. That sheer fact that your attack could possibly miss is such like a wild card factor. And I know like there's definitely a lot of people out there who are either very for or against that. I mean, everyone here has probably heard of or played XCOM at this point. And XCOM is probably the key factor when it comes to RNG. When you miss like a 95% shot, or you somehow hit that 25% chance. And it's great in the way that's exciting, but it's also nightmare in the fact that it completely screws up your plans. Like you can set up this elaborate, multi-unit prong attack, and then the first character misses his attack or the skill, fails. Well, everything else just went out the window. Good luck.
Yes. So I don't know if you've read it, but I wrote an article back in like 2012 maybe called Unpredictability and Control, and it was just a very long look at how randomized results, as I call them, how they affect the play experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
In an action game, right, like say Street Fighter, just to pick an example most people know, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Super Smash Brothers, whatever the kids are playing these days. um, games like that, there is an unpredictability in the play space because you're facing an opponent whose mind is a black box. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what they're going to do. And there is some unpredictability as to whether your own actions will succeed. But that unpredictability comes because A, your opponent could move out of the way, or B, you could just mess up the inputs, right? You could be a little too slow to hit the A button. You'd be a little too slow to hit up on the joystick, It's all within your control whether you succeed or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with RNG at sort of like the point of input
Mm-hmm.
in a strategy game is that it's trying to create that sense of unpredictability by taking away player control. It's
Mm-hmm.
effectively saying, oh, yeah, you hit attack, but I've decided that it's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's analogous to playing Street Fighter and hitting A, and the move just doesn't come out, not because it's been stuffed by a move with priority,
Mm-hmm.
but just because your controller decided not to register the input. It's analogous to that, and I don't think it's great.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has some really negative effects for the players and for the overall feel of the game. Right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to lose a strategy game because you missed on a 95% chance to hit attack.
That's
No
never
one likes that. That always feels like a complete waste of your time.
that never happened to
Right?
me
You
on
made the
stream.
optimal move. The game just decided not to do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing you could have done about it. I think there are things that RNG is really good for.
Mm-hmm.
Anything RNG to affect the game state by giving you a different environment to play in,
Mm-hmm.
or to affect the AI heuristics to make the opponent more unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Even to a limited extent, I think RNG in terms of like randomized results can be good, but it has to be applied in a very limited fashion, right?
Mm-hmm.
The approach that I take generally with games these days is there's the deterministic base, right?
Mm-hmm.
By default, unless there's some special conditions in play, your attacks are just going to always hit.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like very few attacks that can just miss, but it's part of that particular skill's set up, right?
Hmm.
Like overhead chop, right? That's a special skill you can use, and it's very deliberately a gamble. But the player is never in a position where they have to gamble.
Hmm.
They can choose to, right? They
Yep.
have the regular deterministic axe attack that they can just sort of use for a more reliable result. And if they want to go for overhead chop, they can, but maybe they shouldn't.
Yep.
That's up to them.
Yep.
Status effects are. Sorry, you had a question.
Oh no, I was just gonna make a point, like finish what you were gonna say.
Sure, yeah. Status effects are really the main area of RNG in Together in Battle, at least from a randomized results standpoint. But the way I approach that is, I think, different than the way most RPGs approach it. Right? With most RPGs, when you've got a status effect ability, it's all or nothing.
Hmm.
Right? You use D soul enemy or it does jack. Right? You use
Hmm.
sleep. Either the enemy goes to sleep or they're like, what was that?
Hmm.
Nothing happened. I think that's lame. It feels like a waste of time, and it's just a huge letdown as a player to be like, come on, come on, come on, and then like literally nothing happens. So my approach instead is to have deterministic attacks with status effects attached, and the status effects may or may not attach, but you will always get something beneficial out of
Hmm.
using the skill regardless.
Yeah. And that reminds me a lot of what I see from like other RPGs in terms of balance, like Darkest Dungeon. That if you have two skills, one that could potentially heal or do nothing, or a skill that can do damage and then maybe heal off of that, the second skill is infinitely more useful because it does something. Even if you have a 10% chance for that heal to actually matter, you're still getting something out of that. Because, like you said, a dead turn or a complete waste of a turn in these games is such a killer for the player. Because you, as you said, you can do the right thing and still lose. And at that point, like, what's your takeaway? Like, how do you improve on the RNG of the game? You can't just tell the game, make my moves count more, give me 20% more chance to hit.
Right. Yeah, and you'll see games kind of try to get around this, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia with Milla's turn wheel, or in Three Houses with the ability to simply rewind time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's all very much. I mean, to some extent, right? That's to allow you to recover from ambush spawns, but I mean, to a much larger extent, it's to allow you to recover from crappy RNG.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, that was an okay move, but you got screwed. So let's try something else.
Yeah.
Um, and that's one way to go about it. It's far less of a waste of the player's time than making them start the entire battle over. That's for sure.
Oh
I'm
yes.
not sure it's the ideal design approach, but it's better.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that Shark and I have been talking about when we discuss like a more like player directed RNG and this idea of that the player is the one, like the game gives you like a random or semi-random amount choices, but the player then decides what's the best for them. And it's an idea of getting around the fact that the game can screw you. That it's more about kind of, I think it's essentially you're letting the player decide what they want out of this outcome. And the deck building, I think, has been one of the key examples of this, like Slay the Spire and Monster Train. That after every battle, you get a choice of one of three cards. Well, you can decide, which card do I want? And it's not, there really is no right or wrong answer. It really depends on what strategy you're going for. On one run, maybe I want all fire based cards. On another run, maybe I want all bleed based cards. But it's the idea that the player is the one who's in control, as opposed to, again, just the unseen dice roll in the background that determines success or failure.
Yeah. That's a somewhat limited form of player control because ultimately, right, no matter
Mm-hmm.
how you build your deck, you're still, at least to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
at the mercy of the shuffling,
Yeah.
right? at the mercy of the draw. Um, there's a reason why Magic the Gathering players tend to give each other a mulligan, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes you end up with a hand with no land or
Mm-hmm.
all land, and even if you've built the best deck, when your options are solely defined by RNG,
Yeah.
you can't
Good luck.
always guarantee turns that are going to give you worthwhile choices to make.
Mm-hmm. And then to count, like the counter side of that is that if it's too, excuse me, too deterministic, or if it's too set in terms of how everything works, then you get back to that example we said earlier about how too powerful synergies can be. That if I have four options that win every time, and I just repeat them turn after turn after turn, then the decision making goes right out the window. Why would I want to do anything other than those four actions if they're the literally the best ones I can make?
Right. That I would consider less an issue with deterministic mechanics and more of a job for game balancing,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You as the developer, you can't rely on RNG to do the job of making interesting and varied encounters for you.
Yes.
You've got to do that yourself. And, you know, if you're making samey encounters where there are optimal best moves, throwing in a chance to miss is not going to save you.
No. And that's something that I wrote about. I wrote a book on roguelike design that I think will be out in about 2 weeks now. And I said just that RNG and procedural generation, they're not going to save a bad game or a badly designed one. And I think that is a trap a lot of people fall into. That they think, oh, if I can just shovel up all the enemies in the environments, my game now has infinite replayability, and everything is unique. And each time, it's like, no, it's not. Instead of an enemy attacking me from the left, now he's just attacking me from the right. Like that's not changing anything.
Yeah, that only matters if you've built in systems that make it matter.
Yep. As a quick time check, we've been talking for about an hour, and like I said, I warned Craig before we start, like we can run long easily on any one of these topics, but I do want to spend some time talking a little bit more specifically about Together in Battle. So I'd say maybe like
Sure, yeah.
another 20-30 minutes, give or take, if that works for you.
Sure, yeah.
And
Works
if
for
you're
me.
free in the future, come back on again. We're all still stuck inside. We can certainly ramble about strategy RPG design until the cows come home.
I'm stuck in the same pandemic you are, bud. Whenever you
Uh,
want,
all
I'll come
right.
back.
So, and also for anyone who does have questions for Craig about strategy RPGs or Together in Battle, feel free to list them in the comments there. So, with Together in Battle, we've been talking a lot about strategy RPGs or tactical RPGs in general. So, for people watching us, what is kind of like the MO of Together in Battle? Like, what kind of like separates or what makes it unique from a lot of things that we've spoken about?
This is something I could go on and on and on, and I'm gonna force myself not to. I'm gonna force myself to give you a very quick and condensed elevator pitch, and we can unpick it some more if you want. Um, what makes Together in Battle unique is that it is a long form strategy RPG that leans on procedural generation like a roguelite. Now, when you first hear that, you might be like, okay, big deal. That's what Battle Brothers does. That's what other games do. I mean, Darkest Dungeon isn't a strategy RPG, but it is an RPG that's also a roguelite. How is that different? And my answer to that is, in all these games, the designers approach it from the standpoint of, I'm making a roguelite. I'm making something that streamers can pick up and they can do runs,
Mm-hmm.
and inevitably like 99% of the time, those runs will end in a total wipe. Everyone dies. Um, your characters are made of tissue paper. They drop like flies.
Mm-hmm.
And their design resources are allocated with that in mind, right? In Darkest Dungeon, you have procedurally generated characters, but they're designed with the understanding that they're going to die a lot.
And so is Battle Brothers. Definitely that one.
Yes.
Oh, you build your character
Yes.
all skilled. One unlucky arrow. Oh, that was an arrow to his neck. Dead. Goodbye.
Womp womp.
Exactly.
So, there's a limited amount of resources that go into into generating characters like that, right?
Mhm.
It's not like a real strategy RPG where you're going through this story and getting to know your characters and getting to watch them develop as people and mature and go through an arc. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish in Together in Battle. This is not a game where your characters are just going to drop like flies. This is not a game where your units are expendable. I mean, you can hire replacements if some die, but when a character dies in Together in Battle, it's a big deal.
Mhm.
Your other characters react to it. Some may become depressed or go into mourning, and that can last for like a week or more, depending on how close your characters were.
Mhm.
The idea with Together in Battle is to have a proper strategy RPG experience, right? The sense of
Mhm.
having this band of characters that grow close to one another over the course of this story, even as they grow more and more competent as fighters.
Mhm.
And the procedural generation is there to serve that rather than the character generation being there to serve this idea of short, brutal runs.
Mhm. I guess as an interesting point, something that I think we saw like Firaxis has been trying to really push with kind of the further updates and expansions with XCOM. That in the original or even in Firaxis first take, your units are just can fodder. You build your character, you send them out. Oh, you didn't put them behind cover right. Sectoid kills them one shot. In now more examples, there's relationships that can develop. Your characters have a lot more abilities to kind of stay alive, and like a fully or even like partially upgraded character in XCOM, that person, like, unless you completely screw up, it is rare for them to get killed.
That's interesting that they've been going in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I confess, XCOM is not one I've sunk a ton of time
Mm-hmm.
into compared to other SRPGs. Like, I think it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I clearly should set aside some time to investigate it more thoroughly. My understanding it was based more on the original XCOM. I actually have XCOM too. I just haven't had time to play it.
Me neither. I still have to dedicate time to that on top of everything else. And I also got Evil Genius 2 coming that I really want to play as well. So, again, you would
Nice.
think being stuck inside of a pandemic would mean we have all this extra time, but no, it doesn't work out that way.
I mean, I do have all this extra time. I just am using it to make Together in Battle.
Yeah. So, with kind of like your approach to like character development and character growth, like how does that work in Together in Battle? Like, I guess how granular does it get in terms of altering or changing these characters? So again, we bring back up the Skea. You can, take a character, you can transmite them to another class. You can have them inherit other abilities. You can then, save those and, create your perfect warrior, mage, summoner, healer that does everything.
So those things can happen in Together in Battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like Disgaea where your characters are these sort of mutable slots, for lack of a better word, into which you can dump whatever kind of customization you like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and in that regard, it's also different from Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, these are characters with distinct personalities and preferences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the I was actually really influenced by Fire Emblem Awakening in this way. You know, there were certain moments in the game when your characters were paired up where they would, of their own volition, I mean, obviously it was just a die roll, but it felt as a player like it was of their own volition. They would swoop in to help their ally. They would protect them from an attack, or they would jump in and do a follow up attack.
Mm.
And there was something about that that I thought was really compelling. From like, a battle gameplay perspective, it was definitely inferior to the way they did it in Fates, where it was deterministic. But,
Mm-hmm.
just from like a character building perspective, I thought that was really compelling. And I thought that that would be a really good principle to take into the non combat side of things, right? Let characters do things autonomously to show who they are and to give the player the sense that these aren't just interchangeable pawns. These are people whose
Mm-hmm.
feelings and opinions and backgrounds matter. Um, and the player, I go out of my way as much as possible to present the player with situations where they have to reckon with who their characters are.
Mm-hmm.
Characters will come up to you and ask for advice, and you need to, those are instances where you can influence your characters, right? Your characters have opened themselves up to your input. So a character might come up and be like, "Hey boss, listen, I was thinking of maybe changing classes, being a bowman. It's just not working out for me the way that I want it to. I was thinking of maybe becoming a pyrokineticist or maybe a swordsman. What do you think?" And you can do that.
Mm.
You can have multi-classed characters in that way. You can be like, "Yeah, become a swordsman who can also use bows. Awesome. That sounds great." Or you could be like, "No, actually, I like you as a bowman," and that will have an effect. It will hurt that character's morale.
Mm-hmm.
They will think less of you as a leader for a little while for having made that decision.
I think that's a very interesting point about kind of the blank slate versus like the personalized or more like individualism of some of these games. Because like you said, like with the Skea, outside like the principal cast, they're just puppets. You want your mage to wear battle armor, do it. Who the hell cares? You want like an XCOM. Like XCOM, I think was a little bit more individualized, just by at least with the Frax examples with the class system. But there are lots of games, and I think this kind of gets back to what we were talking about in the first part about like grand strategy with just like the overwhelming amount of choices. That I think I do like it when there are these limitations. It helps kind of like I think it helps like kind of like frame or ground your choices. Like if I get a lizard man, and let's say this lizard man has bonus to magic damage, well, I can put one together and say, this guy does more magic. I should look for more magic related gear. And I can start framing along those lines as opposed to saying, here's a character, he can do whatever, just throw stuff on him and see what works.
Yeah, it's interesting. You could practically see intelligent systems trying to walk this line in Fire Emblem Three Houses, right? Where every character can learn every discipline. They
Mm-hmm.
still wanted to give the characters some individuality, and they're like, okay, we're going to give characters different spell lists. Obviously another thing they were influenced by, you know, Fire Emblem Gaiden, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second one, right? They're like, okay, we're going to give characters different spells that they inherently can learn if they become a magic user. We're going to give characters different levels of proficiency, like certain
Mm-hmm.
things just come easier to some characters. Um, and in that way, they kind of like they don't gate your options, but they make some options much more costly. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have definitely seen players who've turned Lysithea into a sword master, and she's got some things going for her in that regard, but man, it's not optimal.
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, I think that's an interesting way to approach it, and I think what's even more interesting than that is like, okay, instead of just making it harder for certain characters to succeed in certain classes, what if they have opinions about what classes they want to be? What if it matters to them? What
Hmm.
if your choices have consequences to your characters?
Yeah. And yeah, I think like Disgaea does that as well. From the layer of Disgaea is that like each class has the grade rating on weapons, and the higher the grade, the faster they'll learn those attacks. And it is an interesting point, but I think, like you said, it's just really slowing it down. It's not really. You're still, if you want to be gung ho and make that mage use a gun, you can do that. It's just going to take, maybe an extra 15 hours of grinding.
That's right. If you want to take Grandpa and turn him into Tiger Woods, you can do it. It's just going to take an extra 10 years. That's not how real people work, right? Real people have limitations, and they have a limit to their patience and to their I guess capacity for dealing with consistent failure.
Hmm.
People tend to like doing things they're good at. um,
Hmm.
and I don't know, I just think it is. I've been interested for at least a decade now in just having more systems that simulate character emotional state, that respond to player choices
Hmm.
in an organic and systematized way. I think it's strange that we still haven't seen SRPGs really delve into that, and that's really the space I'm trying to open up with Together in Battle.
Hmm. So here's a question I'm curious about. Like, with regards to kind of how much information or how much control the player has over a situation, did you ever play or do you know the series King of Dragon Pass by any chance?
I haven't played it, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay. For those of you who aren't, it's kind of like a management strategy game where everything, all your information is being told to you by advisors. And the advisors are supposed to be mobs of like real characters in your village or your settlement. So their responses and their information will always come with like the kind of being tilted towards wherever their respective field is. So the idea is that you're not feeding the player 100% valid information. Somebody may say, "Oh, go fight somebody," but they're not going to tell you you have a 85% chance of fight. Please bring exactly 30 horsemen and 20 spearmen. And what I wanted to ask you about is like, in terms of like this, like when you take away kind of the player's control over this, you also take away their information. Like, what are your thoughts on, like, I guess, like, how much does somebody need to know to make a valid decision in these kinds of games?
I think that very much depends on the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you're talking about, it sounds like, at least to some extent, is right. These characters have agendas, right?
Yeah.
They're unreliable narrators, right? The player can't 100% trust the things they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's an interesting thing to play with. That's something I've done with like NPCs in some of my like narrative driven
Mm-hmm.
RPGs before. Like you will sometimes run into characters who are like, "Help, I need you to kill, this giant insect that's in my basement." And it turns out they're a serial killer and they lock you in their basement. I like playing with player expectations like that. But as far as systematizing that, that is not something I've played with yet.
Mm-hmm. I got also do a video about like player trust or like building trust in players about that because like I saw somebody like make a tweet about I wish more players could trust developers and I'm like no because developers have spurned me so many times in their games are exactly that hey go to the left I go oh you died or you missed all that amazing loot behind you so now I don't trust developers. I will always go the wrong way first, just to make sure you didn't put anything back there. Have that amazing loop behind the waterfalls everyone loves.
Gosh, yeah, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the name of the game. There was this one indie RPG that I played at PAX. I think it was Axe Studios. back before they made their postmodern RPG Yick.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was playing it on the show floor, and they had littered this dungeon with just dead ends with nothing in them. And I was like, man, you can't do that. The player has to have some incentive to keep going. Like, you can't just
Mm-hmm.
be like signposting, like, this is a really long card. It's leading somewhere. It's going to be interesting. No, it's just a dead end. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're going to play with player expectations, you got to do it in a way that's very, I think, deliberate. Um, you know, I think it can be good to mislead players when it leads to a fun surprise. Like, I don't know of any players who were actually upset when they got locked in that event in Telepath RPG Servants of God, because when it happened, it was like, holy shit, this is really interesting. I have never experienced this in an RPG, and I was not expecting it. Um, I think if you can set up holy shit moments by playing with player trust, then it's absolutely a worthwhile thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Or kind of like reminds me of like when I played West of Loathing from the Kingdom of Loathing developers, and like how much like you can go down the rabbit hole some of their discussions of like what they will talk about in that. Ooh, I think you are frozen for a second. Are you still there, Craig?
Am I unfrozen now? Uh-oh.
No, you are. Uh, uh, we may. Let me restart the calls. May break my window, but let me restart and see if that kind of unfreezes you.
Okay, yeah,
All
sounds
right,
good.
1 second. All right, things gonna get all weird on the stream for a second. All right, let's try this again. All right, that is better. But now I just need to pop this out. And hopefully everything goes back to where it was. There we go.
Can
All right.
you see and hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
cool.
good. And thankfully the overlay did not break, so there's a small miracle there. um,
Excellent.
yeah, and trying to, I think, get the like open your game up for those options, as you said, like, and I've seen RPGs and many games will do that. They'll like intentionally troll the player, and it just seems like you're just adding more work for me to do. It didn't really do anything interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The the creator's a little bit disfavored at the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
Firefly, right? That was something that I thought did a great job with that sort of thing
Mm-hmm.
as a TV series, right? You have certain genre tropes that you're expecting the
Mm-hmm.
show to deliver on, and it takes a left turn and it goes somewhere interesting with it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, you can't overdo it on that, or else your game itself just becomes kind of memey. Um,
Yeah.
and unless that's what you're going for. But I think you can deliver some really memorable moments to a player by being like, "This is what you're expecting. I know this is what you're expecting, and this isn't what's happening. Here's
Mm-hmm.
something totally different, but also interesting in itself."
Mm-hmm. All right. Getting back to kind of like Together in Battle in general, like I said, like for those of you watching, I did play a little bit of the Steam demo that you had available, so I know a little bit about kind of the general gameplay loop. But for people watching, like, where does like a play of Together in Battle go? Like, I know like there's a lot of focus on kind of the gladiatorial combat. Do things kind of like go out from there, like as you get further in?
Yes. Um, so I don't want to say too much about this because we get into spoiler territory, and also I'm not sure how much I'm looking to like create branching plots for this, but there is absolutely a higher level plot that intrudes onto the regular gameplay loop and starts throwing monkey wrenches at you after a certain point. You're not just someone who's shown up to be a gladiator, right? You are there on a mission for a group that is rebelling against a corrupt empire. You are there to participate in the games essentially as a pretext, right? You're really there to find loyal fighters and to gain experience as a commander that you can then take back and use on behalf of your rebellion. But you're not just there, minding your own business, doing fights. You're being hunted, right? The empire knows that someone is there. They've got an imperial praetor with men trying to track you down. You end up getting drawn into royal intrigues. There's like a legit plot. It is the proper SRPG in that regard as well. It's just the main loop, right? The main loop that you're introduced to at first is, these gladiatorial fights and the simulation layer in the evenings where you go back to camp and your characters can do as they like. I don't know if you've ever played the old TSR game, or actually, no, what was it? SSI. This was an SSI game. Dark Sun Shattered Sands, I believe, was the name of it. Oh God, this was a game, for the personal computer back in the, I want to say mid '90s. Like this thing ran on DOS, and very, very old, but it had some really, really great moments. And this game opened up with you in a gladiatorial arena. You were essentially imprisoned, and you were made to do these fights, and gradually you had to find a way. And there were multiple ways you could do this because this was a Western RPG. You had to find a way to engineer your escape from the prison where all the gladiators were being held, and gradually you got drawn into this much more significant overarching plot. It was a way to introduce the players to the game world. In Together in Battle, it is similarly, it's a way to frame a lot of the mechanics of the game. It's a way to be like, okay, this is why there are all these fighters available for you to hire. This is why you have all these fights available for you to do. This is the sort of the structure, I guess, the scaffolding upon which we're going to teach you most of the basic battle mechanics. But it's not just arena fights. There are NPCs who will come up to you, and you will have the opportunity to do side quests, which have their own very different style of tactical fights associated with them oftentimes. And sometimes you can just resolve those through dialogue trees. And at some point, the main plot kicks in, and those are very much more like pitched tactical battles.
And I've seen like several games. I know there's been like some in the independent space over the last few years about developers that you start out doing like small battles. Maybe you're trapped somewhere, and then all of a sudden something happens, and now everything is open to you. Go out and enjoy. There's a game that I played last year. I think it was an RPG Maker one. Is this the one I was playing? I'm trying my ever popular Steam list. Okay, here's a Mad Princess: The Great Gladiator. So I think did just that. Like the first 2 hours of the game is just you doing gladiator battles and trying to survive, and then you earn enough money for your freedom. And now it's like, okay, do whatever you want now. The entire land is open. Just, don't wander the death zone until you get some better armor. You're going to die.
That's cool. I have not heard of that one. I used to have my finger on the pulse of all the indie RPGs back when I was regularly posting for indierpgs.com. But, turns out there's only so many hours in the day, and I wanted to get Together in Battle out.
Yes.
That sounds cool, though. I will say Together in Battle doesn't ever fully open up in that way. It doesn't become a free roaming, WRPG in that regard. You're still dealing with the structure of calendar days, time management, returning to camp at night. It's just increasingly you will have your attention drawn by larger events that you don't have control over and that you will have to work around. And in many regards, that particular structure was inspired by the Persona series. That's actually what kind of got me on that track.
So I guess like another question that I have for you, like kind of regarding like the character designs themselves, 'cause we spend so much time talking about them in other games. How are like the characters in your game like built in terms of what do they come with, and I guess how again we've spoken about how they're personality driven, like how malleable are they in this kind of game?
That's a hard question to answer. When you say malleable, do you mean like can their personality change? I mean, okay, here I'll give you an example of something you're not like, right? Personalities in this game are like they are in real life. They're things that don't change easily. They are things that are generally with you for life. They are what make you you. It's this game. It does not take a Darkest Dungeon approach. Personality traits are not status effects that you can go to a sanatorium and just pay to remove, right? If a character is a certain way, that's how they are. The way in which characters are malleable in this game is in a few different ways. One, they can form relationships with each other, romantic or platonic. They can grow to like or dislike each other. They can grow more familiar with each other, regardless of how they feel about each other, and that influences the kinds of interactions they have. Characters can, if they grow really close, they will start teaching each other skills that they know, out of concern for each other's welfare. So they're malleable in that regard. Characters are malleable in terms of morale. The choices you make and the things that happen in battle can impact their morale. And that in turn has knock-on effects for how effective they are in battle. So there's that. There are also moods. Characters can get into persistent moods based on events in the game. If you make a choice that a character finds particularly callous or distressing, that will affect how they behave for a period of time. Like if you run out of food, or if you don't have enough money for payroll, your characters will get pissed at you, and you will see it happen in the game. They won't necessarily resign, depending on how they're feeling otherwise, but they will be mad for a while. So you've got that. There are also memories. Characters form memories of significant events. They remember what happened. They remember when it happened. They remember who it happened with, and they remember how they feel about it. And that can come up again later.
And actually, that brings up a question I want to ask you, because you mentioned Darkest Dungeon, like how their skills work, and I guess how negative can bad morale or bad whatever can affect these characters? Because in something like Darkest Dungeon, you can have stuff like character takes 5% more damage from a dog. Okay, big whoop. Or character now has 30% chance to miss, and now it's, oh my god, I need to get this off of him or throw this character out now.
I have gone out of my way to avoid anything that makes characters ineffective in combat. I actually there are, in addition to all the other things I mentioned, characters come with physical traits, one positive and one negative. So one of the physical traits that I had very early on was nearsightedness, right? It gave characters a 10% chance to miss their attacks. And what I discovered very quickly from playtesting is that this sucked and was not fun. So I took it out. It ran to directly counter to all of the things that I think about RNG in games. It just didn't fit the design vision. So I was like, you know what? This is one variant of, you know, character variety that just doesn't fit the overall direction of the game, and so it's gonna go bye bye.
Hmm.
There's no shortage of other things characters can get though, like you know. But again, it's not like Darkest Dungeon where these are effectively long-term status effects. It's not like that. If a character has a trait, they just have it, and it's something you have to think about. When you're playing, it's something you have to work around. Um, as far as like how negative the traits get, you know, obviously, aside from the fact that I took out the things that run counter to the design of the game, there are some traits with some real negative consequences. Characters can be depressive, which gives them a chance to just kind of sit in their tent and do nothing sometimes in the evening. And like that's not a good use of their time, but it's part of who they are. And it's not game breaking, right? It's something you can work around. Probably the worst trait in the game right now, I would say, is pessimistic. Pessimistic characters, um, I have had to overhaul a couple of times because they're so bad. Um, the problem that I've had with pessimistic characters is that they have an activity they'll sometimes undertake in the evenings called naysay, where they will basically talk shit about you. They'll talk to the other characters and they'll be like, I don't like the way the player is doing things. I don't think we're heading in the right direction. And it will hurt everyone's morale across the board. Um, so, I've expanded there are now different ways naysay can play out. Sometimes they just think about how they're not good enough and that hurts their morale without hurting every other character's, which still isn't great, but it's better. And I just recently added in, there's now like a 1 in 3 chance that they will just sit and overcome their urge to be super negative. And it'll take some of their energy, but it at least won't hurt morale. Um, so, I mean, like that right now is the worst one in the game. And I think it's hopefully, fingers crossed. This is all still very much subject to balancing, but I think now it's probably like okay enough where it's counterbalanced by the combat benefits of being pessimistic, which is that you actually have a huge dodge bonus because you see
Mhm.
all the bad things coming.
Yeah, and again, it's that very fine line you have to walk in terms of balance. Like again, like going back to Darkest Dungeon, there's the kleptomania quirk that characters have a chance of stealing your loot. There's no reason why that would ever be a good thing to happen. So when that shows one character, that's just an instant disqualification for that character. And you have to, I
Mm-hmm.
think, be very careful about that. Like, if something is always bad, it's not really a choice. It's just like, like a dead weight around somebody's legs.
Right. Yeah, I've really tried to ensure that there are no traits that are just bad.
Mm-hmm.
Every trait that has a negative effect also has countervailing positive effects,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Like you can get hot tempered characters. Hot tempered characters, they have downsides. They have a higher likelihood of getting into arguments with other characters, and that's not great.
Mm-hmm.
But they also get they also get bonus experience every time they practice because they have so much you rage to put into this cathartic activity. They get more out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sir Seed in chat has a question for you. They want to know how should we approach creating new mechanics for in this case like strategy games. Should we implement what we would like to see as players, or should we QA and test everything we think of implementing?
Both. I mean, absolutely, you should implement mechanics that you think would be enjoyable to you as a player. But it's like that old saying, trust but verify, right? Like, yeah, okay, go with your gut. Take your good ideas and test them. Make sure that they actually work in practice the way you think they're going to work in your head. I'm certainly still in the process of doing that with Together in Battle. I wrote this very long design document where I was like, this is exactly how the social simulation is going to work, you know. And I in very fine detail, I wrote it out so that I was able to implement it relatively quickly and without too much difficulty. And I took it into playtesting, and in practice, I found that it was lacking something. It needed more. It wasn't like, just because I thought of it and thought it sounded good, that didn't mean it was actually fun, even for me, right? So you know, uh, it's just as with everything in games, you got to iterate and you got to test.
I guess in terms of like length, like where are you kind of like aiming, like as like an average playthrough Together in Battle?
Man, I wish I had a good answer for that. I'll say this: the game is already easily 5 hours long, and it's still in alpha. It's still in development, and I barely gotten started on the main campaign. My guess is that it will probably land at somewhere between like 10 and 20 hours for a single playthrough.
All right.
One thing that I'm very interested in doing is having a campaign that branches at a certain point.
Hmm.
You can sort of ally yourself with one faction or another in this political power struggle that engulfs the city. I'm going to just have one that I finish first,
Hmm.
and I think the plan I'm leaning towards right now is I will release it in early access, and I will build out the second branch over time, and sort of rely on the procedural characters, on the emergent relationship building, on the randomized events, all that to provide enough replayability as I build out these uh, these other branches for the campaign.
Okay. And I guess in terms of like variants, like you mentioned, of course, like having like a roguelite experience with the game. I guess besides like again like having like different branching narratives, are there any elements you're building in to kind of give the game a greater sense of replayability?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, the obvious one, right? Your characters are different every time.
Hmm.
They have different personalities, different backgrounds, different secrets, different skill progressions, and they'll have different hobbies. You know, and it's hard to express in an interview just how much those play in, but you'll have characters that will sit down in the evening and they'll write novels. You'll have characters that will create baked goods, and like you'll just have like random like Gus's cookies just showing up in your inventory because he made them last night. um you'll have characters that will sing to everyone and it'll boost their morale. um you know all these characters are combinatorial. So, there's like a few dozen different personality traits they can have, but that like barely scratches the surface. Like every character is really very different. And you can replay the game a lot and have very different experiences based on the characters you have. So even though, and this is something that I've been interested in, for like a good decade now, right? Like this has been sort of my guiding philosophy on overcoming ludonarrative dissonance in RPGs. As long as you have game stories that are just about plot, that are just about A happens, then B happens, then C happens. Uh, I mean, you're going to have boring stories because no one cares.
Hmm.
Right? Oh no, now we have to do this other thing to get the MacGuffin. No one cares. Like, that's not interesting. But as if you can tie mechanics to your characters and you can have your characters drive plot,
Hmm.
then you've threaded the knot.
That's just a really good point there, and yet, and it is tough to do that for a lot of games and trying to tie all that together. But the ones that do make it stick generally like hold up far better than the ones that don't.
Yep. Yeah. I'm gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Doc, I think, is what he goes by on Twitter.
Yeah.
The writer of Adios.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a whole rant about this back in January, and I was like, "You go. You're right. Character-driven narrative is where it's at."
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I mean, that's definitely another topic we could go on a few more hours about easily. But I know we're getting close to the 2 hour mark, and I think we can probably begin to wrap things up if that works for you. Because I know we can certainly start
Sure,
to
yeah.
like feel winded after these lengthy talks. So I guess to start to wrap things up for tonight, as you said, Together in Battle is currently in alpha. I know you have the Steam page. I think is the demo still up for, or was that taken down after the festival?
I took that down after the festival.
Okay.
I am currently redoing the portrait art. There was a not entirely positive reaction to the cartoony style of the game portraits. So I said, you know what? I'm not taking chances. I'm going to hire someone to redo this in a more traditional WRPG painterly style, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that keeps people from just not even being willing to try the game. So once that's in the game, I'll probably be posting another demo.
Okay. And I know this is a question that every developer hates to be asked, but do you have an idea of when it will be officially out?
Yes, I have an idea. Um,
Are
whether
you
my idea is correct or not remains to be seen.
are you thinking about going on to early access or just going for a direct release?
So I've had people suggest that I go to Kickstarter with this, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's the best use of my time. I mean, I've done Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
before. I've had a couple of successful campaigns, but I feel like this game is of a sort that really lends itself more to early access. Just the sheer amount of randomization and
Mm-hmm.
replayability, I think, will give this game enough legs that I will be able to develop it over time in early access.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully I will be able to retain my audience as the game grows and develops. I
Mm-hmm.
certainly think that the play space in terms of like battles and such is a lot larger and a lot deeper than you see in, you know, Slay the Spire or Darkest Dungeon. So theoretically it should work, but we'll see. You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way to know the future.
Yeah. And yeah, like with procedural generation in mind, like I know when I spoke with Tim Keenan, who did Duskers a few years ago, like he said, like because this game is procedurally based, it's like near impossible as a smaller developer to check everything in that. Because how do you check procedural generation? Make sure it works on every possible variable by yourself. You don't. You go mad trying to do that. But being able to have a fan base to play and iterate on their experience, it certainly helped his game out.
Yep, that's what I think will likely happen as well. You know, I've one of the things that I haven't really been putting front and center in my pitch for the game, but which I think is also valuable, is the game is very, very moddable, and it comes with a very robust campaign creation suite. So I'm hoping that the game attracts enough of an audience of people who really like deep tactical RPGs that folks will come in and be like, "Oh, cool! I'm going to make my own campaign in this." Um, and it's something I've really, really put a lot of time into making as easy as possible. Like almost anything in the game that you can make for a campaign, there's an option to have the game randomize something for you, and you can just edit it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can literally just roll up a bunch of random characters, roll up a starting battle, and you have the beginning of a campaign just sort of made for you.
You are unfortunately frozen again.
Oh no.
Oh no. Let's restart one more time, and then we'll probably use that as a good point to start wrapping up. I do have one more question for you, but I'll bring that up as soon as I'll bring you back on the call. All Uh, Pop that back in. Let's see. There you are. I don't know what is
What?
going on with Discord today. There we go.
It's being discordant, I guess.
Yeah. So one thing that I didn't ask you that I was just curious about, because I don't remember this from the demo, are you going to have procedurally or randomly generated gear in Together in Battle?
Not only am I going to, I already do.
Nice. All right.
Yeah, the way that works is the game takes a sort of a base item type. It looks at what materials are available, and there are certain materials that are locked behind certain side quests,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it generates items with different modifiers. And different modifiers are available based on the type of gear. And I've gone out of my way. There are modifiers just like it's good, it's bad. Okay, fine. That just adds a little bit of variability in terms of like the stats an item gives you. But I've gone out of my way to also give items interesting qualities. Like you can get a weapon that is elongated; it has extra reach. You
Nice.
can have a vengeful weapon that does extra damage if you backstab someone. You can get a burning weapon that has a chance to set enemies on fire. Um, you can get um, this stuff for armor too. Like you can get camouflaged armor that makes it so the AI is less likely to target that character. You can get flamboyant armor that makes it so the AI is more likely to target that character. You can get little things to kind of like play with how your characters behave in the battlefield.
All right. Sir Seed asks in chat. I'm not sure if you have too much experience on this one, but they want to know what what is like kind of like the best social platform to build an audience for like a tactical strategy game like this or a tactical RPG. If you have any thoughts on that one.
Uh, Man, I don't know.
Sorry, Seed.
I would love to have a good answer for that. I don't. I don't know if there is one that's just better.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say this: I find Twitter the easiest to reach new people on.
Mm-hmm.
The whole retweet function
Mm-hmm.
is very accessible and powerful. Um, Facebook, unfortunately, really likes to gate things that
Mm-hmm.
people see to try to force you to pay up for advertising. So would, I would definitely say not Facebook. Um, Instagram seems promising. It's God, it's just such a pain to post to.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Like, I'm still trying to figure out how you actually post videos to Instagram that you don't just make on your phone because it is
Yeah, I
so
was.
geared. It is so geared towards selfies. It is not like meant to be a marketing platform for games at all.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of game developers on it. I don't know. Maybe that one's the best. Hard to say.
Yeah. All right. So before I let you go for tonight, Craig, anything else regarding like design or systems of Together in Battle that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up? Always a challenge
Oh
when I ask
gosh.
developers this question.
I mean, which one do I pick? Gosh, I could talk a lot about all the combat mechanics.
Mhm.
You've got elevation. You can throw people off of cliffs. They'll take falling damage and become stunned. Water is not just an impassable space. In Together in Battle, you can throw enemies into it. They'll start to drown, and they have to like waste energy in a turn swimming out. Lava burns people. Most things on the battlefield are destructible. You can cut down trees, chop through bushes, blow up bridges. Um, you can lay down satchel charges and detonate them and like blow up walls to open up new avenues of attack. Um, there's a lot. There's a lot there. It's something I've like really I did most of the design work on that front for Telepath Tactics, and that one's out. So like if you're curious about that aspect of the game, I
Hmm.
highly recommend trying out Telepath Tactics. Like the whole idea behind that game was I want to make this deterministic system as flush with possibilities as I possibly can to ensure there's this like great big possibility space for the player to explore. And I've taken two together in battle as well, just with a whole lot more that's emergent about the game.
All right. Definitely sounds interesting, and um, I am looking forward to seeing how things develop. The version that you sent me that doesn't have the updated art in it yet, right?
No, unfortunately, the updated art does not entirely exist yet. I'm still getting drafts from the artist, and we're still kind of working out how we're going to make the Mr. Potato Head portrait generation system work with a sort of oil painter aesthetic. It seems like it's going to work, but you know we're still working out the kinks on that. Hopefully, within the next 2, maybe 3 months, we'll have it all hammered out and in
Hmm.
the game.
All right. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up for now. Like I said, Craig, it was definitely a pleasure talking with you tonight. I know when I spoke with Gwen Fay, I hope I didn't put her last name too badly there. We were talking about like we had a whole strategy RPG talk when we were supposed to be talking about puzzle design. So it's fun to sit down and be able to talk about it here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was great to talk to you too. Thanks for having me.
All right. Before I let you go, do you have any social media, anything you would like to plug for people to follow you on?
Yeah, sure. Um, my Twitter is just at Sinister Design. Um, I believe I'm like really new to Instagram, so I don't 100% remember. I think it's is it Sinister Design Games? Let me just double check that. I'm on yeah, it's Sinister underscore design underscore games um, on Instagram, and if you want to find me on Facebook, um, I believe there it is also. Yeah, it's just Sinister Design. Specifically, it's facebook.com/ Sinister Design Games. That's me. You can also find my website, sinisterdesign.net. I have forums there, which I check regularly, and also where I have a dev log where I post daily progress on the game. I also have just a ton of articles and things that I've read the years. If you click the little tag that says design rants, you can read more than you ever wanted to know about what I think about game design.
I think that describes all my articles to a T right there. All right. Well, I think with that, I will let you go for tonight. And yeah, like I said, if you are free in the coming months or whenever and like to come back on for a follow up chat, I'm sure there's plenty of more topics we can certainly talk about.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure.
All right. So, for everyone watching, we're going to be ending this week's episode now. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new, be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. I'll be back in probably 30, 40 minutes after a very late dinner for our nightly stream. If you are a developer working on an upcoming game or want to talk design with me, we are always looking for new guests for these casts. So, definitely, please reach out. Other than that, be sure to check out my books on design, game design deep dive platformers, roguelikes due in April, my horror book at some point. I just finished it, so I have no idea when that one's coming. But again, Craig, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck with Together in Battle, and I'll be happy to check it out when you are ready for me to take a look at it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you.
All right. So that's everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, take care.